After loving Yakuza Like a Dragon and the shift the mainline games in the series made to turn-based combat, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, otherwise known as Yakuza 8, had easily been my most anticipated game of the last few years. When the game received its first official trailer at the Xbox Game Showcase last June, it immediately became my most anticipated game of 2024, and after completing the game back on February 9th, I can happily say the game lived up to the hype, even despite the minor flaws I believe the game has. Regardless though, I'm going to give my thoughts here today, as it'll be hard for this game to move out of my top 5 personal Game of the Year picks for 2024. This is going to be a bit of a backstory just in terms of showing my love for the series, so if you want to skip ahead, I will have timestamps for the video. Anyway, to this day, I've still never owned a PS2. However, whenever I went over one of my friend's house as a kid, we would spend countless hours and sometimes pull all-nighters playing games such as Midnight Club 3 Dub Edition, Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, and the original Yakuza game. The gameplay and the beat-em-up fighting style in the original Yakuza is really what I loved so much about it as a kid, but that mixed with the story and how the whole thing felt like a Japanese action movie brought it all together and made it one of my favorite games to play as a kid, even despite not owning the game myself. Fast forward to 2020, and with a number of Yakuza games on Game Pass, I spent some time playing Yakuza Kiwami, which is a remake of the original PS2 game that I mentioned before, as well as Yakuza 0, which is a prelude to that original game. I didn't play them as much as I would have liked, as I spent much more time in 2020 playing Doom Eternal and the BioShock remasters, but fast forward, once again this time, to November of that same year, and after just getting my Xbox Series X on launch day, I figured why not also grab the newest entry in the Yakuza series. Yakuza Like a Dragon easily became my favorite game to release in 2020, and with that being the first JRPG I'd played in years, I embarrassingly ran into trouble to the point where I got stuck on the Majima fight in Chapter 12 and literally had to watch the rest of the story on YouTube. I still loved the game so much and knew that I needed to be prepared to grind when Yakuza 8, now known as Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, did release down the line so I could actually complete the story myself this time. Well, after around 3.5 years of waiting, the newest entry in the Like a Dragon series definitely didn't disappoint. Like mentioned before, the mainline games now have a turn-based combat system, and it was definitely nice to return to that style of gameplay in a new entry after last year's spin-off, The Man Who Erased His Name, brought back the beat-em-up fighting style. Regardless though, if you're a fan of JRPGs, turn-based games, or even just want to try your hand at one, I'd recommend hopping into Yakuza Like a Dragon first to get caught up on the story and see if you enjoy that fighting style. That combat style was once again fun to return to though for this entry in the series. If you're not familiar, you can change your party members' jobs in the game to change how they fight and give them new abilities that can change up a whole fight, such as being able to heal members of your party or deal way more damage to your enemies. This is something I took a lot more serious in this game opposed to Yakuza Like a Dragon, and it definitely helped me make the final chapter of the game much easier than it would have been otherwise. I don't believe this is a spoiler, as he was in the advertising for the game and is literally on the box for the game as well, but the original protagonist, Kazuma Kiryu, is in this game, and while we're on the topic of combat, I really enjoyed getting to use Kiryu's Dragon's Resurgence ability. Dragon's Resurgence is an ability that allows Kiryu to go into the series' original beat-em-up fighting style temporarily for around 15 seconds until a bar at the top of the screen is drained. This, along with Kiryu's ability to switch his stances while in turn-based combat, are fun differences between him and the new protagonist, Ichiban Kasuga, and are also fun callbacks for longtime fans of the series. The game contained a lot of fun callbacks for longtime fans though, and whether it was the return of familiar faces or something like Kiryu slicking his hair back to his old hairstyle, the creators of the game, RGG Studios, knew exactly what they were doing here. Story-wise, while the series has always been pretty over the top, the series definitely added much more zaniness and humor in my opinion in Yakuza Like a Dragon, and those two traits definitely return in this game. Whether it's the return of Ichiban's crab Nancy, who he saved from an old man in Yakuza 7, or the return of Susumu Ganwara, who has appeared in Yakuza 2 and 7, who's a grown man that enjoys role-playing as a baby. With that said, I'm sure it's easy to tell the game knows how to make you laugh and doesn't take itself too serious when it doesn't have to. However, when things do take a more serious tone, I love the over-the-top Hollywood-like action scenes or mid-fight cutaways that make you feel like you're watching a movie directed by John Woo. Now, while I did really enjoy the story overall, the fan service for longtime fans, and the ending to the game, the story isn't perfect and definitely has its flaws, which I'm going to get into now, so if you don't want any spoilers, you can just skip ahead using the timestamps. Now, I definitely could have done without the whole nuclear waste plot because it kind of just broke down into nothing for me, and I really could care less about it during the final chapter of the game. Also, just a personal opinion, but I really wasn't too hooked on the whole Polycana subplot, despite thinking that Bryce Fairchild was actually a relatively interesting villain. The only thing I felt fulfilled by at the end of the Bryce fight was the fact that I could move on to Kiryu's portion of the final chapter. Then my last big gripe is the fact that Akane, who is Ichiban's mother, and Lani, who is a little girl that is targeted by a number of gangs throughout the story, just feel like they disappeared in the final stretch of the game. And with Ichiban specifically going from Japan to Hawaii to meet his long-lost mother, it felt like there could have been a bit more of a cinematic finish to their story. Regardless though, I did enjoy most of the new characters introduced and felt the story overall was great. While Tomizawa did feel like a new version of Namba, Chitose felt like a new version of Psycho, and Yamai reminded me a lot of Majima, I did really enjoy all three characters and felt Yamai was definitely the most interesting of the new characters introduced. I also really enjoyed everything involving the Barracudas and their boss Dwight. So I discussed the gameplay, story, and characters. That should sum up most of the review, right? Well, not quite. You see, RGG Studios built their sequel to Yakuza Like a Dragon with other games built into this one. There's a whole Pokemon spin-off game where you collect strange behaving individuals known as Sujimon and use them to battle other Sujimon. The sub-story and the whole Sujimon game is definitely very tongue-in-cheek and fun, but personally didn't catch my interest too much as I was super hooked on the story. Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth also has an entire Animal Crossing-like game mode. In the story, Ichiban gets knocked out and woken up on Donoko Island. The characters on the island say they'll help Ichiban return to Hawaii, but for now he has to help them restore the island to its glory in which it once held. The whole mode and concept is super interesting and is a welcomed inclusion, but I wasn't so crazy about having to spend a few in-game calendar days cleaning the island and going through tutorials and such in order to get back to the story and leave the island. It definitely kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, and I never ended up returning back to Donoko Island after I initially left it. I know there's people who love this and the Sujimon battle mode, but personally, neither were really up my alley as I was focused on the story and could just play a game like Animal Crossing or Pokemon on my Nintendo Switch. One other thing or criticism I will mention is I would prefer if RGG Studios improved the auto battle system. There were a number of story fights I will admit I entered into a bit under leveled, so I'd use the auto battle feature, and it felt like nearly every time I'd get wiped. Meanwhile, if I just strategized correctly, I'd win that same fight easily. I understand this mode is great for smaller fights such as the ones you encounter with NPCs while running the streets of Kamurocho, Injinsho, or Hawaii, but even then I felt like this setting could have been improved upon. You can auto battle on 4 different settings, and I felt Be Adaptive wasn't aggressive enough, Take the Offensive didn't heal at all, Prioritize Healing was pretty much all healing, and I didn't touch Do Not Use Skill because you're not going to win a fight probably if you don't use any skills. Regardless though, I understand it's not how the game is meant to be played. I did want to mention though I felt it can be improved upon. Regardless though, with all my criticisms as well as positive opinions of Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth out of the way, and after sinking over 3.5 days into the game, I can easily say this is my favorite game that I've played in a very long time. Giving it a score, I think a 9 out of 10 is a very fitting score for Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth. While I did have some criticisms for the story, as pointed out in this video, I do believe the ending to Ichiban's story, as well as the cliffhanger of an ending to Kiryu's story, were very well done and have me in the same boat as I was after watching the ending to Yakuza Like a Dragon. Extremely excited to see what comes next and where the story goes from here. I really appreciate you guys checking out the video, and if you did enjoy it, then please give it a like, and if you're new to the channel, then I'd appreciate if you could hit that subscribe button. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and I am out. Peace, guys.